Are you looking to learn more about grief and loss recovery? Well, stick around because in this episode, I interview grief and loss recovery specialist Helen Mager. Let's go. Welcome, Helen, to the Mental Health Toolbox video podcast. I appreciate you taking time today to chat with me and offer our listeners a perspective on what you do. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. So you're you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what your niche is?
Sure. So my name is Helen, and I am a certified advanced grief recovery specialist. Um, I know a lot of people have heard about death doulas. It's not specifically that because I deal with grief and loss on a really open scale. Not everything, the grief and losses that we experience are not always specifically surrounded by death. With the pandemic, for example, a lot of people lost jobs or lost family members on the death perspective. Relationships ended, just their simple way of life changed so much. And the simple definition of grief is the emotions that we feel after major change in our life. And that can really, really affect some people. Some people are able to just, let that flow off of them. Most of us aren't. And we will, just like any sort of mental issue, we will carry that around with us, and it starts to affect our lives in so many different areas.
Yeah, most definitely. I know that loss has been a major theme during the last year with the pandemic. Not that there's not already a lot of grief and loss going around, but certainly sounds like a multifaceted issue,
Yes.
right? As opposed to maybe not just the death of a loved one, but loss of relationships, loss of jobs, loss of your business, life transitions, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's some pretty heavy work you do. How did you get into your current work?
So I kind of fell into it, so to speak. I have, for the last about 8 years or so, I work in drug and alcohol treatment
Hmm.
because I have found in my life that the helping people, the selflessness, really fulfilled me to my inner core. Um, and like we were talking about before, I started to get to a point where I was having a little bit of compassion fatigue. So I was looking around for other things. And a good friend of mine actually told me about the institute. It's the Grief Recovery Institute is where I'm certified from. And I looked into that more and just listened to what it was that people were doing. And I was seeing that the specialists were just creating such a drastic change in people's lives. And I was like, I want to try that. So I went to the program, I went to the school and became certified, and then became certified again for the advanced specialist. And yeah, it's heavy work dealing with grief and depression, but when I get to see how drastically it makes a difference in people's lives, that's the spark. That's what does it for me.
Well, that's fantastic. So it sounds like a really concentrated program. You
Yes.
already had, it sounds like, quite a bit of background as a substance abuse specialist where
Yes.
you already were familiar with that interpersonal exchange of somebody going through hardship because, you know, a lot of loss. I mean, as a therapist myself, like I understand a lot of loss is already kind of a byproduct of substance dependence, right?
Right.
Because nobody trusts you anymore. You lose relationships, you burn bridges. Oftentimes people lose thriving careers to substance abuse, their housing, their marriages. And um, there's a lot of choices when it comes to the helping professions. Was there anything that kind of drew you to grief and loss? Because I mean, that's a tall order, it's no small task to dive
Um,
into.
it is actually, this might sound a little dark, but in the past, when I was younger, I actually worked in retirement homes
Hmm.
and volunteered at like funeral homes and things like that. For some odd reason, my life path was just drawn to death,
Yeah.
and I think my perspective, my personal perspective on death, has really helped me along the way. So I don't know if it was like me attracting it or just getting drawn to it, but death seems to be something that has showed up throughout my life.
Yeah, certainly. Is that, I imagine, pretty common that people who get into the helping fields, at least it is as a therapist, I understand, that oftentimes it's from personal experience or struggles or hardships, that we're better able to empathize with the populations we serve.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I went through a lot in my childhood. So my father passed away when I was 5 years old. It was very sudden. Um, it was during the nighttime, and I have two older brothers. That morning, my eldest brother woke me up, and he's just crying, and he just said, "Dad's dead," And so it was just this sudden thing. Um, I was very young. It affected my mental health so much. I was in kindergarten at that point, and it happened in the summertime. They ended up holding me back and repeating the kindergarten because I basically just became mute.
Hmm.
I think I internalized it all, even at that young age, because I didn't have the vocabulary to talk about feelings and
Right.
emotions, and didn't have the outlets and things like that. So that affected me a lot. Um, and then from that point, my family. So I was left with my mother and my two brothers, and my mother was an alcoholic to the umph degree, and so there was a lot of abuse, and so that really set me up for future things. I am a recovering alcoholic myself. Through my teenage years, I started experimenting with drugs and alcohol and things like that, and what most recovering alcoholics will tell you is that became the solution for me. It took my mind off things. It numbed me. I didn't have to deal with the trauma and the emotions and things like that. And I kind of ran with that for many years. And then it was about 9 years ago that I got into recovery. I'm originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I forgot to mention that. I came out here to the West Coast for
Okay.
like a 30-day treatment program. I didn't know anything about AA or anything like that. I just knew my life is, crazy, out of control. I'm addicted to these things and I just need help. So I did that 30 days. It didn't stick. It
Hmm.
actually took me quite a few times of relapsing, going in and out of the program to finally get it. I have a little over 2 years sober now, which I'm very proud of. It's a big thing for
It's
somebody.
huge. It's
Yeah,
fantastic.
it's with all the trauma and stuff that I went through, I've become one of those people that thanks my higher power every morning that I wake up and have a decent life. So that is sort of the path that led me then into working in recovery, and then eventually into the grief work.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing, very vulnerable, you know, history, the background, the frame of reference. And
Absolutely.
um,
Like, or not, I don't want to say like, it always makes me nervous to be vulnerable and share things like that. I do it because I'm hoping that there's people out there that will hear that, who have gone through the same things and will seek help for themselves.
certainly, certainly. And AOD counselors, or alcohol and drug counselors, I think it's pretty common that, I mean, I think it's kind of the consensus that most people who go into that field because they have a personal history,
Right.
right? As a therapist, the clients I work with that struggle with substances, they often kind of echo that, I can't connect with a normie, right?
I,
The lingo that somebody doesn't have the
yeah,
lived experience that they do. So they can't quite, I mean, people can sympathize, but they can't empathize.
right.
It's quite the difference.
Exactly. Yeah, pretty much everybody that I work with at my rehab facility company, they have some sort of experience. Either they're in recovery themselves, or if they're a normie, they've had experience through like family members or
Mhm.
loved ones. Pretty
Mhm.
much, I'd have to say 99.9% of the people there have some sort of experience with it.
Excellent. So that makes even more sense than that you would have gravitated toward both, right? AOD counseling as well as grief and loss because you have an intimate experience with both.
Absolutely. And they grief and alcoholism literally go hand in hand. A lot of people who experience grief can end up in alcoholism, and people who are in active alcoholism and drug abuse end up experiencing grief either because of things they lost or the things they've done. So it's literally a double-edged sword in
Yeah,
that
it's kind of
way.
like a maladaptive symbiotic relationship, right?
Right, right.
Yeah, chicken and the egg thing.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Because a lot of people end up self-medicating,
yeah,
with the grief to not feel their feelings, to
right.
numb, right?
Uh,
Yeah. Awesome. So, where do you see your work taking you next? Now that you've got some experience under your belt as a grief specialist.
I always am considering higher education. I've considered psychology, either as just a therapist or eventually psychologist. I've just been, probably because of my experience, I've just been drawn to that field
Mhm,
through empathy. I feel like I'm able to help people because I've personally experienced so many things.
mhm,
For now, so I still work my full-time job at the
mhm,
rehab facility, and my grief work I do from home. I see people on Zoom just like this. Once the pandemic eventually dies down, I'll see people in person again as well, and also run groups. I am hoping to get my grief work to a point where I can just do that full time. And then I'll be able to, at that point, look into the higher education.
mhm. So
Yeah.
scale it, right?
Yes.
Nice,
Mm.
nice. Is there s- is there something in particular that is you find the most fun or that you're most passionate about the work you do? Because it's so multi-layered. I mean, grief and loss, you can work with so many subpopulations, right? And you bring your own magic to the mix, right?
Yeah. That's a really good question. I think for me, so growing up, I loved, and it continued to this day, I love reading. I love fiction. I love stories. I love hearing about people's lives. So for me, it's really just fascinating to
Mhm.
hear so many different lives. Everybody, each little detail is just you've never heard before because every life is different, and I find that so interesting.
Yeah, it's a privilege and an honor, I know, to be on the end of the helper, right?
Right.
Because
Right.
you're kind of privileged to somebody's intimate thoughts, right? And
Right.
feelings and
And all of the people that I work with, I let them know that what is said in our sessions stays there. I don't, talk about it with anybody else. It's very private. Yeah.
I'm curious, does grief and loss work, does that follow a particular modality, number of sessions? Is there a workbook? How is that usually structured?
So okay. The book that we use is the Grief Recovery Handbook. I have it
Oh,
here.
nice.
You can get this on Amazon for a couple of bucks if you want to just check it out. I actually, when I sign on a client, I send them a copy for free. So we do use that as a workbook. Um, the way that I do it is a 1 hour session per week for 6 weeks. And that is going through kind of the different steps using the workbook to come to See, a lot of people, I'm trying to think of the best way to word this. A lot of people are afraid of grief recovery because they're under the impression that they have to forget that
Mhm.
person if it's, having to deal with death. And it's not that at all. It's more of celebrating that person and celebrating the relationship, being able to speak the things that went unspoken. And yeah, over the that 6 weeks, it's a process of how we do that. And I have seen, not only through my own personal work but through other grief specialists, just the dramatic help that it has for people. It brings them back to having a sense of joy and playfulness in their life, whereas before it was just a lot of darkness, depression affecting so many different areas.
It's fantastic. So, I mean, you're an expert in this field, and I'm curious because we hear about the 5 stages of grief, right? Is that
Yes.
something you go through systematically, or do you just is that even part of the equation?
So I actually get this question quite often, and I always forget to bring it up first. It's the 5 stages of grief are, we don't really use that because each person is affected in such different ways. Not everyone will experience all 5 stages, and they'll also not experience it in a particular scale. So
Hmm.
we don't really use that scale. We're just going with what the person is vocalizing of how they're feeling. If they're experiencing anger specifically, because anger is a big one that comes up with a lot of
Hmm.
things, then we focus on that rather than saying we're going to do these 5 different things.
Right. So less of an assumption and more of how the person's presenting, right?
Right, the
With their
personalized.
particular struggle or where they're
Ye-
stuck, right?
yes.
That's fantastic. Where do you where do you feel like your superpower is? Like where do you what kind of again that magic, what do you think you bring into that relationship, that healing relationship that is effective?
um
I know it's
Maybe.
a tough question. It's hard for most helpers to identify what they
Right.
feel they makes sets them apart, but I think it's important to kind of acknowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe it's the empathy that
Mhm.
I have this ability to empathize with so many people because of my own experiences. I really have a lot of people, even complete strangers, kind of just open up to me, and it's always been that way my whole life. I don't know if it's their sudden sense of trust, which I don't take lightly. When people trust me, I do not, gossip about things, or what's said here literally stays here.
Mhm.
So yeah, maybe it's the sense of empathy that people can see, and they just a lot of people just seem to have that comfort level with me, and so that's become my superpower.
Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine that's very appealing to people. How do you turn that off? I imagine like as soon as you tell somebody like on an airplane, like or we can't really escape or like in a restaurant or something or some social venue that, what do you do? I'm a grief and loss counselor. I imagine it's kind of a magnet.
Right, right. That can be different in different situations. I typically do not turn it off. I allow myself to be a space for other people because in helping them, I'm helping myself. It's fulfilling. It's very soul fulfilling work. And I do have that more often than you think. It's just like complete strangers, just telling me their whole lives or their issues and things like that. And I listen. I just sit and listen. If there's a moment where I literally don't have the time, I will say, I'm so sorry. Take my number down or my email down. Let's talk some more. But at this time, I have to run and do this. I've just I have the capacity, and maybe that's another superpower. I simply have the capacity to listen and to be an open space for people.
Yeah, because I mean, that can be very emotionally and mentally draining, for a lot
Yeah,
of people who don't have the reserve, right?
right.
How to
And
navigate that. right?
Yeah, and I've always, if I could explain it in kind of a visual way, I think about a dream catcher where, a dream catcher supposedly lets the dreams flow through. And that's kind of how I experience it. I try not to completely internalize things, but I listen and take it in, but let it kind of flow through.
What a fantastic analogy. It's the first
Yeah.
time I've heard that used.
Okay, cool. I
I
thought
love
about
it.
that years ago, and
I
I'm like, I
like
don't
that.
know if that makes sense, but
It
it
makes
does to
perfect
me.
sense to me.
Okay.
I have a dream catcher, so there you go. Um, so I know we touched briefly on compassion fatigue. So being in the business of empathy, right? That kind of runs through you to your core, and you don't really turn it off, and that you're kind of an open door for whoever wants to share. How do you manage, you know, the the compassion fatigue, the burnout?
Um, Making changes is a very big one, and a lot of self-care. I on my days off, I there's days where I literally do nothing, and I don't let myself feel guilty about that, because if
Hmm.
my body and my mind need to rest, I just allow that, or I take time for myself and do the things I like to do, hobbies and things like that. But the change specifically, so like we were talking about, I started to experience some compassion fatigue in working full time at the rehab facility. And
Hmm.
it wasn't so much of the compassion and taking things in from people. It started to become more of very long hours going into an office for me. So getting into the grief work and making that change to where I get to work from home and make my own schedule. Basically,
Hmm.
that big change helped a lot.
Yeah, I can imagine. So you've kept yourself, you've coped well by finding another thing you're equally or not, if not more passionate about than
Right.
just what you've been doing prior, like with just the substance use work.
Yeah.
Staying
Perseverance.
inspired, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Perseverance has been a strong suit for me throughout my life.
Wow.
When something's not working, you move on to the next thing.
I love that. I love that. Or open mind,
Right.
right? It's just being curious to a large extent.
A
Yeah.
lot of curiosity. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Logistically, how have you managed the transition from your 9 to 5 bread and butter job to this new path that you're carving for yourself?
So it's still in process. What I was doing prior to the last couple of weeks was at my particular company, rather than working like 5 days 9 to 5, we actually would work 10-hour days 4 days a week. So that was nice because I would get 3 days off, and typically in a
Hmm.
row.
Hmm.
So during those 3 days is when I was able to have time to see people or time for that self-care. um, so actually, about 6 or 7 weeks ago, I was exposed to COVID at my
Mm.
job. I got it. I tested positive. I got really sick. The first
Mm.
week or two, I went through all the typical symptoms: the coughing, the sore throat, et cetera, et cetera. And then that started to go away. And I was like, okay, good. I'm through the thick of it. It's getting better. Then in the third week, I started experiencing neurological issues.
Mm.
I call it almost like fits. My whole body would just start shaking really bad,
Mm.
to the point where I actually couldn't walk without like falling down. It was really scary. I was in contact with my doctor the whole time, and I had taken the couple of weeks off of work because of the COVID, and I've continued taking more time off because of all these other symptoms I'm experiencing. I'm at the sixth or seventh week now, and that shaking, it's not so intense now to where I'm having like the fits. But it's kind of constant. So I've really been affected long term from COVID. But the silver lining in that is being off of work from the 9 to 5 has completely opened me up to be able to work with more people with my grief work and reach out through social media and things like that.
Excellent. Very good. Very good. Um, as far as kind of the nuggets, like some nuggets from your experience that you would like listeners to maybe take home with them after listening to this, what would be your kind of quick nuggets of wisdom or advice to someone going through grief and loss, or if they something they could pass along to somebody they know going through grief and loss?
Yeah, for somebody actually experiencing grief or loss, allow yourself to organically feel what you're feeling. There's nothing wrong with what you're feeling, whether it's depression or anger or relief. Some people specifically, they were taking care of a person for a long time, maybe an elder, sickly parent.
Mhm.
Um, and that took a lot out of their lives. Then that parent passes and they feel a sense of relief because they don't have to take care of that person anymore, and then because of the relief they feel guilt, you know um and so that bit of wisdom is just, it's okay to feel what you're feeling. It doesn't make you a bad person
Mhm.
to feel these emotions. And specifically for people trying to help loved ones who are experiencing grief is just listen. Um, don't Within my program, we talk about a lot about what we call the myths of grief work, which is things that we were told for so many years. You'll get over it. Time heals all,
Mhm.
replace the loss, et cetera, et cetera. Those things are myths. They don't actually help your grief in any way. So don't relay those things to your loved one because it doesn't help. If we've experienced grief and somebody has said those things to us, we know personally we wanted to be like, no, to hell with you.
Right.
Um, so just listen and help with practical things. A lot of people say, if you need help with anything, give me a call. Don't hesitate. That's so open that usually people never take you up on that. Help with practical things. Call, say it's a friend of yours and they're experiencing grief. Call them up and say, hey, why don't I come over, order some dinner, and we'll sit and watch a movie. Put it into action. Put the care into action,
Mhm.
and and be honest. A lot of people don't know how to deal or help somebody else with grief and loss, and be honest about that. Just say, hey, I don't know what to say or do, but I'm here for you, and that's it.
It's
You know.
fantastic because a lot of people I think get caught in the, like you said, the myth trap of
Mhm.
not knowing how to help someone. So then they kind of either pop off with some cliches
Right.
or basically
Repeat.
echo what's been said to them in the past, which they
Exactly.
probably know isn't helpful, but they don't know what else to say. Or
Right.
they shy away from people. It's like somebody with cancer. If somebody doesn't
Right.
know how to comfort you because they feel like they should be able to contribute something to help you, right?
Right.
They love
They
you.
Everybody wants to fix things,
Right.
and not everything is fixable.
And if people don't know what to do, oftentimes they shy away and they don't help at all, which can
Right.
feel rejecting, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
absolutely. And then the person feels a complete other sense of loss.
Exactly.
Mm.
Right. So not just being stigmatized, but now people feel awkward around them and don't know what to say. And
Right.
yeah, I know when I'm working with clients, I often encourage them, if you can tell somebody else what you need, you'll get what you need a lot quicker in terms of the type of support. Do you just need to vent? Do you just need someone to listen? Do you want practical advice? Do you need resources? Right. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. A lot of people have trouble vocalizing their needs or even realizing their needs. They're kind of just like,
Hmm.
I feel horrible. I don't know what I need.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. And that notion you were talking about, just offering to be with someone and watch a movie, that there's a term for that, like sitting Shiva or something along those lines, right?
Okay, yeah, I believe I've heard that term before. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's exactly it. Just be there, and
Right.
do something practical for them.
Right. So you don't have to talk about it. You can just be some superficial company. And that's might be
Right,
exactly what they need, right? So they
right.
don't to distract them.
And
Yeah.
even ask the question, do you want to talk about it? Because a lot of times they might just be like, no, like I just want to sit here with company and be okay for a little bit. But other times they'll say, yeah, if I do need to talk about it. And when that happens, listen, that's it. Don't interject opinions or help or tips or anything like that, because literally just being that open space and listening is so helpful for people.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Which was very
Oh,
helpful to really
of
listening because
course.
I know I've been stuck there, and even as a therapist, sometimes I'm like scared to touch it, when someone close to you because you're like, oh, I don't want to screw it up. you know?
Right, right. Yeah,
Um,
that's the great thing about the institute is it focuses solely on grief. And so I'm not a therapist, so I don't have the education or knowledge that you have. But when it comes to grief, I have so much more knowledge than the average therapist, if that makes sense.
oh yes, absolutely. I mean, I've been practicing for over a decade, and even I'm scared to touch grief and loss, a
Yeah,
lot of times because I, have not been exclusively trained in that.
right.
Um, and because it is, oftentimes a very murky process because you don't want to push
Make it
someone if
perfect.
they're not ready, right? And so being
Right,
careful with those subtleties, and
right,
sitting with them it's not more, knowing when to listen actively and when to challenge them,
right.
be
Yeah,
tricky.
absolutely.
Absolutely. A question I get a lot from clients is who are going through grief and loss is, what kind of resources are available? Where do I find a support group? What books should I read? Or, oftentimes people are at a loss, especially if it's their first time suffering a loss. It's not common knowledge, where to go
Right.
for help.
Yeah, yeah. You can find grief support pretty much anywhere. You can, Google it and you can find live meetings in your hometown, or you can do them online, things like that. Um, the way that what I do, the grief recovery process differs from a support group, is that in a support group, you're never coming to a sense of completion. It's going out, letting your feelings out,
Hmm.
but it kind of ends there. And so you're still carrying the suffering with you. Whereas with the grief recovery process, you actually come to a sense of completion with your sadness and suffering.
So that's kind of what the transformation or the recovery looks like. It's something tangible, right?
Right.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
and for books, yeah, like I said, we use the Grief Recovery Handbook. It's really great. You can get that on Amazon for like eight to $10 or something. But if you go on a bookstore or Amazon and just type in grief, there's so many wonderful books out there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And then I was wondering if there's if you have any other side passions, because between all the stuff you're juggling with the helping fields and recovery and grief and loss, like do you have any personal passions, anything that you leverage as part of your self care that you would like to incorporate into the work you do?
So I love to write. I'm not very good at it, only because I haven't had a lot of practice.
Mhm.
But I loved writing and reading since I was really, really young. I just love that expression, artistic expression, and I love storytelling.
Mm.
So that's a huge one for me. So everything that goes along with that, I love movies and entertainment in that sense. I don't watch a whole lot of TV. I actually don't even own a television. It just doesn't really, like, the flipping through channels has never really appealed to me. For me, it's very boring. But I do love, like, I have my laptop where I'll sit down and watch movies on Netflix. Love that. Um, and I love animals. I actually worked with animals for a while too, as veterinary assisting and grooming and things like that. And so that's a big passion of mine, is helping animals. Currently, I have two dogs and two cats,
Mhm.
and luckily they're out of the room right now because I can hear them barking and everything
I
out.
think everybody got a dog during the pandemic.
Right, right. Yeah, exactly, exactly. which is great. I honestly, I believe pretty much everybody that can, afford to financially, mentally afford to have a pet should have a pet. It's such a great outlet for um, emotion, and it's a sense of giving and receiving unconditional love,
Hmm.
and it's a great way to experience that.
Fantastic. I was going to ask if I hear a lot about emotional support animals and how effective that is. I imagine that applies to grief and loss as well.
It absolutely does. Yeah, I'm a true believer in support animals. I think it helps. I think there's kind of a line there. I don't really insert my opinion on it, but there are trained support animals that you'll see, people with, blindness or certain physical or mental disabilities. Um, it's kind of become this blurred line where your average person is taking little Fluffy in their purse and saying, this is my support animal. It's not a real support animal. It can support you emotionally, absolutely, but I worry about that because I'm afraid it's going to get to a point where businesses say, I'm sorry, we can't let any animals in at all because
Hmm.
people are taking advantage, and then the people with the true disabilities suffer because of that
Right.
you
Right.
know
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Or I was curious, going back to the idea of subpopulations, like where do you see your career taking you next? Do you see yourself working exclusively with adults or children or particular types of losses, or is it pretty
Yeah,
open?
so I currently only work with adults, people over 18, and yes, I'm going to spend more time at the institute to become certified specifically in working with children, and then they also have a specific pet loss grief session certification. So I do want to do that because I would like to work with children in the same sense where I work with recovery and addiction. I'd love to work with youth in that sense as well, because I think if we can help people at a young age, it can set them up for succeeding later in life, if that makes sense.
Certainly, yeah,
Yeah.
because a lot of grief and loss, if it starts in childhood, like you said, can lead to other things if it's not dealt with. If
Yes.
you don't learn how to cope more effectively,
Yes.
people will find their own way. You know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very good. Um, well, I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing, if somebody's interested in learning more about you, how to find out, what you're about or services you offer. Is there a place people can find you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So my website is grievingspace.com.
Hmm.
You can get more information on there, and you can personally contact me through the website. I'm on social media. Both of my Instagram and my Facebook are my grieving space, or at my grieving space.
Hmm.
So you can find me in both of those places as well. I'm going to start doing TikTok as well. Like I'm going to make some
Fantastic.
videos where I just put a little bit of information out there
Hmm.
and see if I can, reach people through that as well. But yeah, those are the easiest ways. I believe on my Facebook it actually has my Google Voice number. So if you find that, you can call me directly or text me directly. I never turn down calls and texts and things like that. I do get a lot of the people just, not they're not calling for that specific reason. It's,
Hmm.
like people trying to joke or something like that. So I get a lot of that. So
Sure.
if you call and you get my voicemail, leave a voicemail, name, number, and hey, I'm calling about grief recovery, and I will get right back to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. That's a great site you tagged, by the way, Grieving Space.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It still needs quite a bit of work. I want to add some pages. One thought that I had is I want to add a page to it where people can go in and anonymously write about what they're experiencing. Even like a paragraph or a line
Hmm.
or a couple things, just saying my, my father passed away last night and I feel guilty because I'm relieved by it, or, like we talked about
Hmm.
before. And it'll be an anonymous outlet for people to kind of, get some emotions out.
Absolutely. That all in the same boat, right? Because seems like shame and guilt would definitely be a common theme,
Right.
and feel like you're the only one having these thoughts, and so, or conflicting emotions. And so if you
Yeah.
see other people with similar struggles or internal conflict, it can be very validating.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, shame, guilt, anger come up so much, and the anger and relief, like I said, makes people feel guilty because they're experiencing these things. And, I just want people to know that don't feel guilty. You are human. We have human emotions. We don't have always have control over those emotions, no matter what they are. You're not a bad person for experiencing what you're experiencing, and there is help out there. That's specifically what I do with the recovery process is to bring you to a sense of completion with those negative emotions, so that you can move past it and go on having a good life and experiencing joy in your life.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm sure there's lots of interested people listening, that will use this information and to help themselves or a loved one. So I appreciate the time you've taken to share your story and your mission.
Yeah, and
Right.
thank you for having me and allowing me to put the word out there.
Of course.
I want to help as many people as possible, and so I'm trying to do everything I can to let people know that this is available.
Fantastic. And I'll look up that book. I'll link it in the description so
That would be
people
great.
can find it pretty easy. And then the name of the school, in case anybody else is interested in being a helper as well.
It is the Grief Recovery Institute.
Mhm.
And yes, if you want to become a grief specialist, you just contact them. They'll give you the rates and time periods and things like that for the classes. I had a really great experience with it. I loved the people that I learned from, and yeah, it's quick. You're not spending 6 years on your masters or anything. It's over just a
Right.
few.
It's
Yeah,
targeted.
it
Yeah.
is targeted,
Targeted.
specialized. Yeah.
Yeah. What's known as a terminal education. It's like you learn something specialized and then you can get to work, which is
Yeah.
oftentimes very, very important. Um, is that in Malibu as well, or where's this school based?
It was originally, I believe, started in West Hollywood, California, but they have moved. They're now in Utah,
Oh,
but it's
nice
all
country.
online. Yeah, so the
Yeah.
classes are online.
Oh, fantastic. So you can take it from anywhere pretty much.
Yeah,
Super. Really helpful during times like these.
yeah, absolutely.
All right. Um, Helen, I was wondering if would it be okay if I check in with you down the road to kind of see how things are going with your business and
I would
your
love that.
adventures?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that'd be great.
super. Like a follow up. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Well, I appreciate you taking time today to share. And for all of those listening out there, do check her site out, grievingspace.com.
GrievingSpace.com. Yeah.
Super. Okay. And we'll link up all of the information, the where you can find her in the description, as well as her site, and we'll throw up a bio on the show notes. And yeah, if you have any questions, reach out to Helen. Okay. Well, you take care,
Okay.
and till next time.
Yes, sounds good. All right, thank you so much. And yeah, everybody out there listening, if you just want a little bit of information, it's free to call me. So please reach out.
Thank you.
Thank you.